Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Healthcare Social Media, Harnessing the Power of #HCSM for Medical Education, Reputation Management, and Promotion. My name is Karen Labello, Director of Education for the New York Chapter ACP. Our panelists today are Viren Kaul, MD, the Chief Fellow of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine at Mount Sinai School of Medicine at Elmhurst Hospital Center. Viren also serves on many chapter committees and is an NYACP Council Board Rep. And Kita Sagar, MD, Fellow of the College, is an attending physician in general internal medicine, Director, Ambulatory Quality Medicine Service Line, and she's Assistant Professor of Medicine at Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra Northwell. Dr. Sagal serves on many NYAC committees, and she is Chair of the Early Career Physicians Task Force. And our third panelist is Dr. Niket Sampal. He's also a Fellow of the College. He's an attending physician, and he's also a gastroenterologist. He's Associate Program Director of Internal Medicine Residency at Brookdale University Hospital Medical Center. He's also Assistant Professor of Medicine at Touro College of Osteopathic Medicine. Dr. Sampal is Chair of the Chapter's Residence Committee. Before we begin today, I would like to review a couple guidelines. All participants will be on mute. If you have a question, please type your question in the dialog box on the right, and our panelists will answer at the end. If we run over the allotted time, we will send the answers to your questions through email. This webinar is being recorded and will be hosted on the chapter's recorded webinars page at www.nyacp.org, and the handouts will be emailed to everybody who's on the webinar today. I would now like to introduce Drs. Kaul, Sampal, and Sagar to today's webinar.
Thanks, Karen. I think I speak for the three of us when I say that we really want to thank both Karen and Ben from NYACP. They've done a fantastic job getting these webinars together with us and gotten on quite a few phone calls in the middle of crazy days. So thanks, guys. We'll get started. So this is one of my favorite quotes when it comes to social media. I hear all the time that people are, worried or scared or anxious about getting on social media and what if it doesn't work. And my answer to that really is that it's not like, there's no deadline, we have all the time. So the only thing that's going to happen is that, it won't gel with you, and that's fine. But, I always recommend that everybody should at least start trying. So today we'll just go through, we've already talked about this in the part one. So we'll talk about a little bit of advanced stuff today. So basically, where can you apply social media as physicians, reputation management, utilizing social media for medical education, and then using that to build a portfolio to use for promotions and tenure. So we'll get started with the application potential of social media, and this was briefly covered as well in the first part. So the most obvious answer here is the bottom of the pyramid, which is it helps build your personal presence and creates an impact for you, whether you're a trainee or you're a specialist or in private practice or a teaching setup. It doesn't really matter. Your profiles are all out there on Doximity. And say whatever social media channels you do use. And later on in the webinar, Dr. Sagar is going to speak about how you can easily be found on US Health, and it's very out there. So it's a good way to actually dictate your own presence online. Dr. Sagar will talk about organization impact now.
Thanks, Ryan. So social media obviously has a great opportunity at the personal level, but definitely on the organization level, there is a lot of correlation between patient satisfaction, patient engagement, community engagement, and also kind of getting your expertise out into your community as being a leader, both at an organization as well as a personal physician.
So regarding using social media to learn, not to teach, which will come up next, but to learn, what I love about it is that you don't have to go anywhere, you don't have to travel, you're sitting at home and you can just absorb a fantastic amount of information very quickly. It doesn't matter what device you're comfortable using, whether it's a phone or a computer, and that makes learning super easy, right? Because it's adaptable to formats and works with your time.
Right. Speaking of time, obviously, a lot of us, when we are planning on our careers, we're looking to mentors and sponsors, which is two very distinct categorization. A lot of times we may not have the mentor and the sponsor that we're looking for in our immediate circle, but certainly social media can leverage that ability to find a mentor, a sponsor, funding opportunities, RFAs, RPAs, obviously a lot of guidance that is available for free from a lot of celebrity physicians and folks who are really leaders in medicine.
True. And then with that comes the opportunity to collaborate. And this again is one of my favorite because simply um, I've sort of kind of built my career on this. Besides the actual clinical part of what I do, I've had the opportunity to collaborate across institutions, across continents, and then across hierarchy, mainly because it's flat, right? It doesn't matter if you're a professor or you're a student. If you're on there and you're, sort of engaging, that's a good enough start. In fact, let's see. Out of all the publications last year, I feel like 80% of the co-authors I still haven't met, simply because we met on social media and decided to do a project or publish something. So um, it's very neat how that works. Very different from real life.
Right. And in the same thread, you can take those publications and actually make your own module for med ed education, use your blog, podcast, videos, infographics. A lot of visual abstracts are coming up, and tutorials, which I'm fairly new to, but Lorraine introduced me to this idea, and my mind is blown.
Did you check some out?
I did. They look fantastic.
This is my
It
personal
is amazing.
in
It's
terms
your
of the
first time?
this is my personal favorite of all the different variations of how social media is used. Just from a long-standing, doing an education, I always like the fact that social media allows you to gain scale. Whereas if you're in a classroom, you can have 50 students, 100 students, 5 students on rounds. But on social media, you could be teaching thousands.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Talking about, feedback, I personally find this to a little hard to come by in real life. I mean, I think we've all talked about it within friends or at meetings that even though there's feedback systems, but they're not easy to work with in sometimes institutional confines. But on social media, people will give you feedback. They won't hold back. So if you really want to improve your content, no matter what you're building, so I would say a bunch of my presentations, especially for topics that are new to me, I'll always ask for feedback. And it also works after you've done something. So I've recently, this is new for me, so take it with a pinch of salt, but I've started hosting the talks that I give as a fellow on SlideShare, and it's amazing how much feedback I receive post presentation. So if I was ever to go back and give that talk again, I think I would be pretty ready.
That's awesome, Rain. Yeah, and I think you had mentioned earlier how social media-based research has been a big, big, big platform for you. And I think I have seen a lot of our younger faculty, junior faculty, or just kind of budding researchers coming out of social media-based research, both sociometric research, knowledge translation. And there's a lot of research being done on the patient engagement portion of it, so much more to come on that.
I agree. This is going to build careers, I think.
Yeah.
And I feel like I should let I think Niket talks a lot about this, and um, burnout has been a crux issue. Moral injury has been a crux issue. I think I recently read somewhere that my generation, I'm not going to generalize here, but I'm apparently a millennial, and our generation was recently called the burnout generation. And I took a little offense to that, but I recognize that it is our generation that has brought this issue to the forth for a variety of reasons. And one good way where it's being addressed is via social media. So if this is something that interests you as a physician, as an administrator, or as a trainee, you will find a lot of ways to collaborate and be effective on social media in this area.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of medicine that's becoming more and more common. And I think, in previous generations, the idea of burnout and the idea of feeling sort of lost and in a hole was seen as a sign of weakness. Millennials started 1981, so Varen, you and I do count. And it's become a big thing, because even though we're called the quote unquote burnout generation, we're caught between growing up analog and then having to live in a digital world. I'm going to be on CBS tomorrow morning talking exactly about millennials and how they're supposed to handle healthcare when they don't want to sit for 2.5 hours waiting in a waiting room, and they want to be able to talk to a doctor through their phone. So there's a lot of friction, and I think all physicians experience burnout, whether it's chronic, acute, or acute on chronic. I just think that our generation is the one that needs to talk it out, and I think this offers a platform, and I think it's a good starting point, but it's definitely just the Band-Aid on the gash. I don't necessarily know if it's the right modality anymore to talk it out, because unfortunately there's a lot of stigma still with physicians talking it out.
Yeah.
I think you might have lost the kid there for a second.
Okay. So yeah, exactly. So burnout definitely, and that leads a lot of the themes around burnout were propagated because of a lot of advocacy work around the fact that, maybe physicians do need to address this issue. So just talking about the advocacy part, which I am emphatically excited to voice for every physician on the webinar, is you can definitely use advocacy skills on your social media and also push forward policies or things that you are maybe not so excited about at a regional, national, of course, hyper-local level also. Plenty of opportunities to write, sharing memo briefs, or even just your thoughts on a column that was published.
Right. So with that, I think I do hope that we've convinced you that there's many opportunities, and then now it really comes down to how you can harness the potential of the multiple things. I do believe that one person cannot do everything, and so you really have to find what really interests you and go at it. So, talking about reputation management, this is the reason I included this is because it's been asked of me a number of times in follow-up questions. So I wanted to address it head on. So I'll give you 3 physicians whose these are cardiothoracic surgeons whose sort of ratings I have accessed at US News Health section, and these are publicly available. And this is literally what it looks like. So there's physician 1, physician 2, and then there's physician 3. And my question to you is, if you were looking for a cardiothoracic surgeon for your family, who would you take your family to? And then the other part of it is that do these ratings truly reflect your expertise? And to me, it's a little bothersome that we've come down to this. It feels a little bit like a Black Mirror episode. I recognize that, but this is where we are at. So, and then it's complicated by something that Dr. Sagar is going to tell you in a second about how these ratings are built.
Right. So exactly to your point, Ryan. So a lot of these ratings are then kind of garnered into an engine and used as rating systems for especially US News and World Report. One of the ways that they pick their top docs across the nation are actually kind of leveraging all publicly available ratings and expertise. The other thing that I wanted to mention was not only are physicians kind of rated, we all know that hospitals and health systems are also rated by US News World Report. And one of the ways that they pick their best place working or best workplace in healthcare is actually through social media engagement by physicians on Doximity, which is such a great reason to be involved in social media.
So let me understand this, and I know I haven't asked you this, maybe I should have, but so when they're doing this for the top hospitals, they basically, so if I like my hospital, I can upgrade it. Is that correct?
Yes. So the way they do it is they take all physicians who have a profile on Doximity and they send a survey to a random selection of all the physicians employed by a health system who have a profile on Doximity. And you complete that survey. It's completely anonymous. And then what they do is they rank it on multiple different levels. So they, of course, use kind of morbidity and mortality data, readmission data, but specifically for top workplace and healthcare, they use the ratings from physicians on Doximity to rate
Wow.
their health systems.
Wow. This is giving me some amount of stress from how we use
Yeah, I'm
impact
getting
factor.
anxiety too.
I mean, you both
So
must be getting stressed because you're already working.
Yeah.
yeah. So now I feel like we're being like rated for like a TV show. Like, how do we get to that Seinfeld, Friends, How I Met Your Mother level rating? Because this sounds exactly like that. And
What shows are you watching, Nikki?
I'm watching everything. I have no life. I watch a lot of television, but the point is, like, I feel like with a small microcosm of doctors who rate it, I
Yeah,
mean, it makes me worry.
yeah.
Like, can these things be affected, right?
Yeah, exactly. We can talk about this quite a bit, right? But in the interest of time, um,
Next publication.
yes, next publication, right? But talking about publications and actually, giving you some data and not just going by, oh, we like this and we don't like this. So, I have these two studies that I'd pulled up, and the first one basically is a very, very interesting study that talks about how the rating landscape has changed over the last 5 years. So, increasingly, physicians are being rated online. It's become a uniform practice. And Ankita was going to tell you about the other study, but that is the part that is vital to understand here. This is from 2012.
Right, exactly, Brian. So the study that came out in 2012, like you pointed, kind of gives us the idea that there are these correlations between what we conventionally think about quality metrics, like we mentioned, morbidity, mortality, readmission data, CAUTIs, CLABSIs, all of those things. But now we're using external agency data. So that's our Press Ganey reports that are being included. And any online ratings that are being included in physician practice and how well they are being rated.
And as I understand it, going back to the real world, these ratings are being then used to reimburse physicians.
Yep, exactly.
That
So MIPS and so under MACRA, patient satisfaction is one of the benchmarks or metrics that you have to meet a benchmark on in order to be appropriately reimbursed for care.
is crazy. All right, so it really comes down to, so what is your personal presence? And really, it's all of it. It's your, if you made a website, which I was telling these guys when I was little, I made this food blog that I've since managed to get buried, but it was a chronic embarrassment if somebody looked up my name. So that showed up. If any part of your blog is public, if you're giving comments on, say, Yelp, or if you posted your seminars online, or you're interacting on Twitter or Facebook, and all of that really is your presence. So keep that in mind. It's not just the one thing that you do. Um, so I wanted to give you an example on how much data is out on yourself. So I just Googled myself because I didn't want to pull up somebody else. But in less than 1 second, there's 60,000 results. I assure you they're not all about me, but there's enough where I was like, what the hell is this? Like, where did this come from? And it's interesting that it's not just Googling yourself. There's other things like Press Ganey surveys, and like, Dr. Sagar was explaining US Top Docs, and now you have other purely just rating websites like Health Grades and stuff. So what you do in your real life and your digital footprint has a very, very wide presence. And I know that Dr. Sagar has had a very interesting experience with this, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to share something very, very personal with all of you, which my husband has no idea I'm sharing. But here goes. So my husband and I got married a couple of years ago, and very recently, like less than 4 weeks ago, a patient I was seeing in my practice said, "Oh, you looked beautiful on your wedding." And I said, "Oh, thank you, but how did you know that?" And she said, "Oh, I Googled you because I was looking up your phone number and your wedding video. I watched your wedding video."
Oh,
And
man.
I was flabbergasted.
That's kind of creepy.
Exactly.
You
So
think?
my videographer took it upon himself to post a portion of our wedding video, which is called a wedding video highlight, and post it on Vimeo, not YouTube, but still, it was out there. And I don't even know how many people had watched it, but apparently, when I Googled myself, it was the second link that came up, which means it's gotten a lot of hits.
Wow.
That's crazy, right? Because this is nothing to do with professional part of your life, right? But Nikki,
Yeah.
that's kind of, it's worrisome, right? Because your
Of
patient
course.
already walks in with an impression.
No, of course. I actually
Does it happen with you?
yeah. So I mean, I have a lot of videos up on teaching and a decent amount of material out there for this kind of thing. But at the same time, I've also had in my personal life where I've had people set me up with someone, or when I'm trying to quote unquote. By the way, I do occasionally do date people, and so I had a young woman say, "Oh, I looked you up on what was that one? It was the one that does the scoring." God, I can't remember the name. The one that you get scored, the health grades. She's like, I saw
Oh,
your health
right
grades.
here.
You must be a really good doctor. You had a lot of 5-star ratings. And the back of my mind was like, that's what you. That's like the third thing you've ever said to me. And that's weird. And
That's crazy. So it went the other way around. People were looking your professional profile up to figure out if they want to date you.
right. And so what makes me worry is that are we as physicians open to revenge ratings by people? Like I'm a lovely person, so no one ever hates me after we go on a date. But I'm just saying, what if it happened? Theoretically.
Yeah. No, it's something to think about, right? Because yeah, like you mentioned, the lines are blurring. Agreed. But at least I think the point of this slide is you should be looking up what's out there about yourself. I wouldn't become obsessive about it, but at least I would say once every few months you should definitely do a check. But talking about going behind your
Not to
own
cut you off, but one thing I definitely know is that we have a lot of students in the group right now, and so for those of you who are actively applying to the next match or actively in the match right now, always remember that there are program directors. I'm not one of those program directors. I don't care, but there are others who do, and there are some programs that actually do look at your social media presence. And so some
yeah,
places you'll notice people will suddenly have different names on their social media. It actually doesn't make a difference. They
right.
can still find you. If you have crazy fraternity life, sorority life photos on your Facebook or Twitter, you might want to deactivate during the match.
No, I think that's a fair point. Actually, it's been very hotly debated. And yeah, no, I agree. Good point. Talking about level at an organizational level, it's very interesting that not only have doctors been increasingly getting rated, national organizations, hospitals of all kinds and all setups have decided to join social media. This study that I'm quoting, the first one shows a trend, but this was 2014. We just concluded a study that was accepted to ATS 3 months back, and I believe about 30% or so of Palm Credit programs in that study were on Palm Credit teaching programs were on social media, but literally every single hospital that we looked up as a hospital was on there for one purpose or the other. Um, so if you're somebody involved in an organization's, management or your fellowship, it's something you might want to consider.
Right, great point, Brain. Also, like the second study that's mentioned here, hospitals that had a lower readmission or unplanned readmission, I should say, had higher ratings on Facebook. That means that clearly their patients are engaged and they are likely to find care more frequently or appropriately utilized. So, thinking 10, 20 years down the road, perhaps there might be a time when social media ratings are being included in metrics.
Right. And I mean, I obviously don't, I mean, from the statistics standpoint or from causality standpoint, I clearly don't think one has got anything to do with the other. But the fact is that it looks like it's an indication of the care you provide. So as an organization or an organizational leader, you should look at those readings and say, what can we do to take this input and make things better. So to just summarize, talking about presence, both personally and for your organization, please Google yourself regularly. Make sure you know what's out there about yourself. And if you find profiles about you that are present, so basically on, say, Doximity or LinkedIn, or at least in the major professional websites, I would strongly advise that you claim your profile and then keep it updated. One good way to, if even if there is some negative noise about you on there, or things that you don't want highlighted, the way to mitigate that is to just share helpful information. Um, Talk about whatever you're educating at work or what your beliefs are, your advocacy, stuff like that. And one easy way to build up or to sort of help with optimization of your presence is to link your professional channels to each other. So, for example, my Twitter account links to my LinkedIn account, and that way they kind of feed off each other. And then step 6, and I think this is the most difficult part, is to get rid of things that are unnecessary, things you don't want there. Some of them you'll have control over because you posted them, and hopefully, if you can remember your passwords a few years later, you'll delete it. But then there's some other stuff that other people have posted. So things you can do is to reach out to those people or to the websites and say, hey, I don't want this profile out there or this information out there, and how can I get rid of it? But I would advise doing that. So moving on to how or where do you start? I think we've gone over this a bunch of times. So the number of options, going through, starting from simple stuff like Google to now ZocDoc, which helps people find appointments, to Doximity, Amazon, stuff like that. I would say pick a couple, pick a search engine like Google, and pick a professional site. So I personally prefer Doximity over LinkedIn, but that's not, that's just preference. You can choose either. And then pick one sort of site where you can write. So, for example, WebMD, or a blog that you can contribute to, or something to that effect. If it feels like it's too much, it is, because it is. But it's just a matter of getting started. Once you do, things start getting uniform. So, for example, I'll highlight Doximity here. I have no conflicts of interest, but I do like it because initially, when I was trying to create a digital profile online, I didn't want to go and add all my CV in there. It was too much work. So what Doximity allowed me to do was you send your CV as is to them, and one of their editors will nicely build it into different categories or segments and update it and let you know. And they'll even edit it as you want it, or you can edit it yourself. So I would pick a service, one of the services like this, and then use that profile link everywhere else that you are. Sort of tied into that presence. What do you guys think about that, Niket or Ankita?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love Doximity because, so like you had mentioned, Brian, I recently handed over my CV because it was a little too much for me to retype everything. And a few weeks later, they sent me this wonderful email and said, "Hi, Dr. Sagar, we have uploaded our CV. Please let us know if we can change anything." I'm like, wow, it's like having a virtual assistant do your job for you. It was fantastic.
Except it's a human. That's the best part.
Right, exactly.
Well,
And it's
I'm going to
amazing.
admit I have actually never used Doximity yet. I know I have an account because they were giving out free cell phone charges at a conference, and so I signed up and I never logged in. But now I'm convinced to try it.
Are you on any other? I mean, Doximity is just, I'm going with preference here, right? Because,
Yeah, I have a
but
LinkedIn
what
account.
you
I
like
know that.
LinkedIn?
Yeah, I think we're friends.
We are. Oh, I'm not on LinkedIn, so I believe you.
And it's not us.
Um, no, and to be fair, LinkedIn has its own advantages because it works differently. LinkedIn has more people active. It is, if you're trying to sort of hobnob or job search and stuff like that, I think I would prefer LinkedIn. Thanks to my visa status, I didn't have to do a lot of job searches because there wasn't a job for me. So I went with the one, never used it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So talking about also managing, sort of leveraging social media for yourself, and you don't have to do the work. And this, I think, is key, right? So if you're a busy physician who's like, this is nonsense, this is not worth it. But remember, there are some parts of your social media presence that you can easily manage without putting in effort. So, for example, your workplace web page, right? So, I picked Larry's workplace web page. I'm sure you all know him from NYACP and works in cardiology, of course. So I just wanted to see what it looks like. And as you can see right off the bat, right? So there's a clear photograph, clear headshot. He's smiling. That's great. You know, there's on the right, there's links to his, let me see if I can actually, oops, sorry. Hang on. Okay, we're back. I think I lost control for some reason, guys. Ben, I'm sorry. I think I lost control. Oh, there you go. All right, I'm back. So yeah, on the right, you can see that there's the social media accounts that he works with, and that's great because it all builds into his presence. And lastly, it's easy to find him, right? So there's a phone number, there's a way to find him, and this should be adopted by pretty much any healthcare practitioner in any setting. You know, you can be in a private hospital. If your hospital does not have this kind of a website, it's totally worth an investment. It doesn't have to be fancy, it just has to be clear. Continuing on, I thought this was very interesting. You know, Larry has done this video about what interests him, but I'm sure as internists or primary care physicians, if you made that video about smoking cessation, for example, or diabetes, or prevention of, say, anemia, then you should put that out there because that is work that you were doing for your patients, for your community. And I know, Ankita and I were discussing this, but this is something that you think is more difficult to come by, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you have the opportunity to actually build your profile on your workplace webpage, because every physician has a webpage on their workplace nowadays. But especially talking about community engagement or even what makes you a community leader, I think is a huge boon for the physician themselves, but also for the health system. So I would find it very difficult to imagine a health system who doesn't want you to share all the good stuff you're doing.
Yeah, agreed. And then you go ahead and you write about your training experience, and I think this is people underestimate the importance of this page simply because your patients want to know what your training is in, or if you've got any specialty interests. So it's transparent. It gives them an idea about your breadth of experience. And a lot of them, it starts great conversations sometimes, if people have lived in those cities or areas. So it's a good thing to have on your webpage, as is your publications. This is something that really, and I might actually study this, so if one of you wants to collaborate, let me know. But I feel like I go on physicians' web pages and there's like studies from say 2000 or 2010, and that's okay. But if you've done something more recently, and it doesn't have to be publications, but if you've done any work recently, you should have that on there because it shows an ongoing commitment to your community. So with that, I think we'll end reputation management as a topic. And we'll move on to medical education and how you can use social media. So um, I'll be very short about this slide simply in the interest of time, but there's a number of ways you can engage with social media. You can work with journals. You can, like I'm on the social media team for Chest. It's very interesting. It's a very different kind of skill set, very different kind of experience, but it really helps you keep on top of literature. You can do research like we've talked, and then there's the audiovisual and writing components. The audiovisual components come in various formats like videos or Vimeos or, augmented reality in 2019, of course. But I know Ankita and Niket both write a lot. So do you guys want to talk about that briefly? Because I feel like that's a very sort of high impact way of teaching online.
Yeah, I mean, all of these different venues are a big one. My personal favorite is, and I think what has been found to be very, very effective has been, so blogs for sure. I know Ankita has one. I've never done this so much blogging thing, mostly just because, just out of, exposure. But me, I like the short videos. That's why I think some of the more larger platforms like Instagram and Twitter seem to do well on this because of the type of audience we have, where they prefer short, what the ACB calls small bites of knowledge. The only thing you always have to keep in mind is that you will occasionally get patients, or you'll actually get people who will write into you and say, hey, I have this issue. And more lately, we have to put up disclaimers saying that this is for education. If you have an actual issue, you should see a physician, or if it's an emergency, call 911.
Right. Like, not medical advice, right? So yeah, so basically the point being there is something for everyone, even as an educator. So I want to go over some of those opportunities. So the common ones, like I started with, are the blogs. Even in internal medicine, purely as a broad space, there's at least, I can imagine, 30 or 40 very active blogs. People have their own blogs. Depending on how prolific you want to be, you can go either way. I don't have the discipline to maintain my own blog. It's like starting a restaurant, very difficult as a business. Or as a venture. So I usually will contribute to other blogs, and that way I can do it on my own time and my own schedule. And there's different types of blogs. You don't have to write just about medical knowledge. You can, for example, the NEJM blog is often about things other than just knowledge that can impact you as a trainee. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can contribute in form of blogs. There's podcasts that it is a preferred format for me. I'm sure some of you have tried these. These are some of the, podcasts that are very, very effective. I do love the Annals podcast, especially for its formats. They're very easy to listen to. They don't go on forever. They're not excessively dense. But this space is also, there's opportunities here, because besides the Curbsiders and Core IM, which are the two big internal medicine blogs, it's not like this space is congested in internal medicine, and there's more than enough content to share. So if anybody is wondering how to make a plunge and you have a little bit of resources, this is a great place to start at for educators. Talking about online journal clubs and Twitter chats, this is my favorite, is in the sense that it's offered in different ways. So for example, Twitter, people do these journal clubs. They talk about the most recent articles. The primary authors often join. It's short. It's not like a rambling debate. It's obviously limited by the characters. But if you are interested in long format debates, NEJM, for example, hosts these journal clubs. They can go on for days, and again, the primary study center is part of it. So you get to learn directly from the authors. The way I see it is, it's the easiest way to pick up the most recent literature. But I do strongly also advise reading your own literature. I know Ankita recently has gotten into these as well. She was telling me, and they don't have to be medical always. For example, the Women in Medicine chat, again, something that I've learned a lot from over the last year, is a different format that Kita can tell you guys about.
Yeah, no, I agree. I love Twitter chats predominantly because I can be sitting in front of my TV on my couch, and I don't have to be professionally dressed to be addressing or sharing what I'm thinking. So you can do it at any given time of the day or night. The other thing I love about Twitter chats is you're building a community that is
That's
very
true.
necessary.
That's
One of
true.
the things that I've gone from the Women in Medicine chat has been life hacks, and I think that was the most recent chat we had. That was yesterday, about what are the greatest life hacks. We talked about food delivery service, we talked about laundry detergent, dry shampoo. So really, like you said, it doesn't have to be all medical.
I have to say the dry shampoo bit has always blown my mind. But staying on topic, tutorials. You know what? Since we did already talk about it, I'll keep this one brief. But these are so effective. So what it is, and I'm putting Tony and Elliot on there because they're probably they've made this into an art. But what it is basically a chain of tweets, each to 80 characters, with pictures or sometimes polls, where they try to explain a simple, straightforward concept, right? So is there a role for checking ammonia and hepatic encephalopathy? Or like Tony here is talking about role of, why do you become hypoxic in PE? And, in these 8 or 9 tweets with appropriate pictures, appropriate references, you can learn so much about these basic concepts that I am addicted to the tutorials. And I know Niket and Ankita have said the same thing. So talking about another form of interacting as an educator is visual abstract. So there's this website called visualmed.org that I recently have run into. And what VisualMed does, and this is done by journals, by individuals, what you do is you basically summarize a concept or a recent study. So on the right is this non-inferiority Merino trial. And it's an easy way to catch up with information. So whether you're specialist or you're not a specialist, right? It's impossible to keep up with all the evidence. And in critical care itself, like 20 to 30,000 articles are coming out, in a very short span in a month or so. So it's impossible. But this is a good way, you get the gist of it. On the left, for example, is this infographic that we created from the chest working groups to kind of get people introduced on how to tweet live during a meeting. And this is another different kind of medical education, because I know that's something people want to do, is be involved at conferences. And so we figured this is a nice way to encourage people to do that. So there's a number of different ways you can engage this format of teaching. Talking about videos, so I don't have the patience of sitting down for a lot of long videos, but I do think these short format videos, like how to insert a subclavian line, how to put an IO in, and such, are very, very effective, because I remember that when I initially tried putting a central line for the first time years and years ago, you just had that NEGM video, which is fantastic, but you just had to know what to look for. Today, you can just go on YouTube and like literally barely type the thing correctly, and you'll get 15 resources. And I think if you're an educator who wants to do that, this is a fantastic space to go into. I do want to highlight this article that literally came out in the last couple of months about how this program is using WhatsApp, which is a media exchange service essentially, to teach fellows. I know a lot of residencies are doing this as well. Our fellowship does this as well. And they're basically sharing images from cats or difficult cases along with a little blurb of information. And this apparently has been very, very effective to deliver education to fellows. So hey, if any of you guys are interested in starting something of this sort at your workplace, clearly there's evidence to show it works. So before I go into AR and VR, anything to add, guys? Okay. So virtual reality and augmented reality are increasingly just becoming kind of standard in med schools. I know a bunch of med schools are just teaching, they're trying to teach the section on sort of non-human, cadavers. They'll digitally be able to engage with different elements of anatomy. Or for example, I know that NYU was trying to do with GI fellows is they can do a colonoscopy and practice that. I know a couple of hospitals where neurosurgeons can recreate images, and I know one of our hospitals does that. They'll recreate images beforehand and practice on that before operating on the patient. So this is increasingly going to become very commonplace. So if this is something that interests you, great space to expand into. We talked about advocacy briefly, and I will let Ankita talk about this because this is her gem.
Yes. So I am all about advocacy, and predominantly when I first started on Twitter, it was because I felt that there's this huge mass of people, right, who really need to know what's going on in med ed, policy, local regulations. So through New York ACP, I got involved with Twitter, and if you look at my tweets, most of them are about advocacy or something that I feel strongly about that either patients or physicians need to be engaged with. And it's been very helpful because you don't have to think about an essay. You can just
Right.
retweet something you find that was helpful. And I think you had mentioned that earlier, that just sharing resources is huge on a lot of these social media websites. So advocacy is part of sharing, and I think it's been helpful.
And I'm sure you've found your own community of people who feel similarly about, same issue, similar issues, and that helps, right?
Yeah, I found mentors through it who
Nice.
are advocates on a very large national platform. And I've made friends with people who I wouldn't know. Like, I live down in Brooklyn and they're up in Rochester. We would never cross paths. But it's been great.
Awesome. So the last two things I want to talk about is how to use now social media. This is all what you can do and should do, and I recommend that you do. But the question is, what's the end product of this, right? And I think to tell you to do anything without getting tangible benefit if it doesn't make sense. So I do think that you can use social media for advancing, and this is not just in an academic setup, it's in a private setup, it's in a practice setup. You can use your social media skills. So this is language directly from advancement committees. So what counts towards advancement is basically, using models which recognize, if your work has engagement in form of metrics. Are you getting grants? Are you producing research, right? Um, so since 2016, what Mayo Clinic has done is, and they're leading this, Daniel, who I'm shortly about to collaborate with, basically changed their structure on how they think about digital scholarship. And now digital scholarship is used to allow people to advance in their careers at Mayo. And I suspect strongly that a lot of institutions are going to make this the norm going ahead. This is the seminal paper that Daniel wrote about it, and the fact that ACGME published it is clearly an indication that that's where this is another thing that's going to change over the next 5 or 10 years is social media criteria or digital scholarship criteria becoming more commonplace. Um, so the way I think about it is that it's like real life. You just don't say do one study and then leave it. So the way I start is you get on social media, you start interacting, you find your colleagues, you start doing research, or you start writing. With that, as you start finding a niche, whether it's you're the tutorial guy, you're the visual abstract guy, or maybe one of you will find your own format. As you do that, you'll start getting speaking opportunities. You'll get a chance to get called for national conferences to talk about what's innovative about what you do. And as you do that, your collaborative circle increases and eventually your output increases. And this really, really is very much like real life. Um, so how do you use your social media work to create a portfolio, right? So how do you, and I will tell you how I'm going to mention this webinar I'm doing today, sorry, with you guys on my CV. So there's something called as Glass-Six framework in medical education, which essentially is a way of when somebody looks at your CV and they read, okay, you publish a case report on this topic in here, they look at basically whether they realize it or not in these six sort of buckets. So what you did was there a clear goal to it, right? So that's why when we talk about preparing your CV as a trainee, we say, it's good if you're engaged in multiple things, but you should at least have one or two favorites. If you're publishing in 8 different specialties, it makes it difficult, right? Is it well prepared? Were the methods, so if you're suppose writing a blog, is your blog appropriate in terms of its methods? Is it thorough? Is it referenced? Just because it's a blog, it doesn't mean that you don't have to be factually correct, right? Um, there's increasingly ways to publish without journals, and I'm not going to go in there. But at the end of the day, the question is how you're presenting your results. And my personal opinion, and this is definitely something that's going to change the next 10 years, 15 years, is if you've got good results and your data is solid, no matter how big or small, that's what's going to matter. It's not going to matter which journal you're publishing in, and those things are going to diffuse away with time. So social media is going to be instrumental. So if you have good content, that's what's most important. And at the end of the day, how you're presenting your work. So this we will go over in the next few slides. So before you get on including social media work into your portfolio, you should have clear goals. And this is the most important slide, I think, in terms of using it for advancement. So who are you building content for? Is it undergraduate medical education, graduate medical education for fellows, for other physicians, CME? What kind of content are you dealing with? Everybody has different approaches to this. I do medical education using social media. I do have significant amount of clinical involvement, right? Like I'll do expert commentary on blogs and such, but that's not my primary area, and that's okay. Um, that's perfectly fine. Kira's is basically advocacy, and she's advocating for practicing physicians, for colleagues, for trainees, for her specialty, for the issues that she believes in, and that's perfect. And then how are you doing it? Are you doing it as a video? Are you doing it because you're blogging? Are you writing about it? Are you so you have to be clear about it, who, what, and how. Okay. And the last thing, and this is the most important thing, I think, is where people struggle, is how do you report your work? So let's say Ankita went for, sorry, Ankita, I'll just pick a random example. So let's say you went for a Hill Day with NYACP, right? So,
Right.
and that's something you did, yeah? You took time out of your day, you traveled, your patients didn't get to see you. So think about it. So the way you mention it is, okay, I went for NYACP Hill Day on this date. And then you mention, like, what exactly you did there. So you visited, two representatives or two councilmen, talked about this and this issue, and specifically about, say, bill this and this and this. And what that does is, so what is the content? Okay. And what was the effect? But let's say you want to talk about writing a blog. So what was the type of content? It's a blog. Where did you create it? I'm writing on Doximity, for example. Is it a durable format? I'm going through content hosting and curation if people are following. Is it a durable format? So yes, if you write something on, say, Doximity, or if you write something on, WebMD, it's durable, it's cached, it's never going to disappear, and that's important, because can you imagine if somebody published something in sepsis and then it just disappeared one day, right? So it shouldn't be like that. And this is one of the reasons why I'm a little skittish about making my own blog or my own page, because it's very difficult to manage. And that's where we come into platform administration. So if you do start your own blog, you start writing, then you have to be on top of administering it, keeping it clean, keeping it easily accessible, and then keeping track of your data, so that you can use it to put in your CV eventually. The next part, which people will often criticize on social media, is that there's no peer review, right? So people will say you can write whatever you want. Well, things are changing, right? So now most established education resources will allow you to critique them in real time, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's through comments, and then they'll include and acknowledge them. So essentially, they're acting like journals, except things get done, let's see, like in a couple of days as opposed to a few months. So that's huge. Um, and lastly is about recording your analytics. So how do you analyze your impact and using these metrics, like, my webpage has 50,000 visits, right? So if your webpage has 50,000 visits, you're obviously doing something right. And that's literally how you record your social media work. So the way I'm going to be putting this webinar is I will be saying invited speaker, comma, NYACP webinar series, comma, whatever the topic is at CSM and social media or MedEd, comma, date, and then I'm going to write about the subtopics in there. And then I've already, so I'm going to write about the number of attendees, and I'm going to write about where it's going to be hosted, which is NYACP's website. And I've already requested Ben to give me the number of questions. So last webinar, I answered a bunch of questions. I'm sure there's going to be some today. And I'll write about how many questions were asked, how many were answered. Sorry,
Sorry,
what?
Brett. Got about 6 questions.
Great. And I'm gonna in 6 months check back with Ben and say, so how many views has this received on our website? And I'm gonna put that into my CV. And that is a very clear way of people to know what was the impact of my work, right? I want to briefly talk about using altmetric scores. These are basically article as well as journal level metrics to gauge impact of your work. So they look like, so if this is the article that we put out last year, most journals will put this little donut next to it. And so the score is the number in between, which is 83. The donut is this circle here, and normally it can be of different colors. And these colors right here are dictated by what is driving traffic to this publication or to the web page or what have you. And so, for example, most of this was coming from Twitter, some from Mendeley. And this is a good way of knowing if an article is doing well. Is it because I shared it everywhere or my friends shared it, or is it diffuse? So it's a good way of knowing it. It's a good thing. So even when I mention my traditional publications, I also mentioned that, for example, for this one, I would say altmetric attention score 83, ranked 5% in all research output ever scored by altmetric. And that's fantastic. It looks good on your CV. Um, People might not know what it means right now, but they will, because like I said, it's becoming part of how you grade people for advancement. And similarly, like I said, it's not these altmetric scores or your website views are not just for your social media work. This is the best part, is you can use these to bolster your traditional work, your traditional publications. So for example, whoever wrote this article can mention that this is how much engagement they've got, and you can move past impact factors and eigenfactors in that sense. So what I would say is, start slow, figure out what interests you, experiment around. You'll like some formats, you won't like some formats, and eventually you'll find your niche. It took me 5-6 years to figure out what social media platform I like. So take your time. There's no hurry at all. So with that, I think we can take a couple of questions, right, guys?
All right. So if anybody has any questions, just type them in. Sorry, just type them into the box on the right. We already have a few, and we'll get to those. So, all right. First question is: do you need to employ a person for social media in order for it to be effective? It sounds like it's for like a group practice or a larger practice.
I actually didn't understand that, Ben.
Sorry. The question was: do you need to employ a person in a practice for social media in order for it to be effective?
I mean, Ankita, I feel like
Yeah,
because you're already working, so maybe you guys would have an idea.
sure. Yeah, I think that's a good question.
Yeah. Go
Go ahead,
ahead.
Niket. I'll let you lead. Go ahead.
I think it honestly depends. Like, it depends on what your goals are. If it's just for spreading the knowledge of your practice and to try to get new patients, you don't necessarily have to hire someone, but you can actually get a publicist. And there are actually people who specialize in this. If it's just for your own personal sort of like, I want to enjoy this as part of like interacting through the screen, then you can run it yourself. I think it depends on your goals.
I do also think that it also helps your patients, right? Like you don't have to engage with them, but suppose, like I'm thinking of simple things, right? So if your practice is closed some days, or your practice has added somebody new and stuff like that, if you're able to do that on your own, if you're able to just make those simple little updates on your own, then by all means go for it. But if your practice is 50 people, then yeah, getting a strategist is not the worst idea.
Right. Yeah, and I just want to add that, to both of your points, goals need to be very clear on what you expect the return on investment, so your ROI on social media. If your goal is you want to spread accurate information about your practice and you want to engage with patients and perhaps build volume, I think it is a good idea to look into even getting an undergraduate who is doing a media's relation type of graduate degree to take a look at your website or your social media platform.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it doesn't have to be somebody outside. I'm a firm believer that if there is a responsibility, you need to assign that role to somebody discreetly. And as long as you have that in mind, that it'll be part of this person's responsibility, then that should be okay. But make sure you pick the right person for it.
All right.
Great. So next question: can social media be used as a tool to collect research data?
Yes. Who asked this? Please email me. This is literally my life right now. We just got a grant actually. to do this particular research in social media, and it actually has nothing to do with medical education. We're actually trying to create this sort of a idea of footprints and how people interact with each other in the healthcare sector. So yes, there's so much research you can do, and I'll tell you the beauty of it because I want people to come join us. The beauty of it is that most of this data is publicly available. So unless your IRB is finicky, most of the times this is not even IRB exempt. You don't even have to ask for an IRB permission at all because it's like Googling stuff. So yes, lot of opportunities for research.
All right, this will be a quick question. What do you think is the most influential social media platform today?
I love that question.
Yeah, good question. The one that I'm on. I don't know, actually.
Right, of course.
Honestly, I get the feeling that I get a lot more, personally, I get a lot of interaction through Instagram these days. Facebook has had some scandals lately. Twitter, people get turned off because of a scandalous leader. So it's hard to really gauge, but I think everyone knows
been blocked.
What do you think, Baron?
I think it really comes down to what you want. So and I we covered this in the first part, but so if you're a visual person and if you're trying to teach people visually, for example, you want to draw, if you want to make little graphics, or if you want to teach a concept using graphics, Instagram is great for that. Instagram is also great because there's no restriction on your writing space. So if you're trying to explain a concept or a graph or whatever, what have you, that's great, right? Facebook there's too much noise. No matter what you want to do on Facebook, the over aggressive auntie always comes into the picture. I just can't deal with Facebook honestly anymore. And then Twitter, there's always an auntie who's waiting on Facebook. It's like it's gonna happen. But Twitter, on the other hand, I think is brief. You can't ramble. There's only 280 characters to put your point across for most part. Very fast paced. It can be a little overwhelming, but pretty much the who's who of the world is on Twitter. I've interacted with people I would have never even talked to, like senators and actors, and it's not that we had a two-way chat, but you can agree on a common topic and you can come up with interesting collaborations. One of my mentors ended up writing an article with Sully because she's into patient safety and he's into safety after what happened 10 years back. And now they wrote something together a few years back in JAMA. So if you ask me, I would say go to Twitter. I also don't understand Snapchat. I should probably not say this out loud, but
I think to your point, Viren and Niket, that again, have your goals very clear. If it is that you just want to make a professional profile and kind of be a passive information kind of coming to you, then perhaps more of like the LinkedIn or Doximity, where you just create a profile. There's no maintenance necessary to really do much with it. If you are hoping to engage in a community, then I agree with you. Instagram, Twitter are great for that also. I'm on Twitter, and the reason I liked it so much was I use it as my personal news feed first thing in the morning.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I agree.
Great. In the interest of time, we've got quite a few more questions. So what we'll do for everybody on the call, I will send a lot of the questions to our panelists, and we will give you personal responses back via email. But to end, so I've got two more questions for you. One, if you guys could just, somebody had asked if you have Instagram pages, if you could just plug your Instagram handles real quick, the three of you, if you have them. So we can get that out, and then I have one question to finish up with that.
We just put it into the chat.
Yeah.
You type into the chat, or you can say it out loud.
That's my Instagram handle.
Oh, this is embarrassing.
That's at SunPalMD. Varen's is at _ICU_man. I'm sure he didn't want me to say that out, but
See, this is what I said. You gotta Instagram. I'm okay with Instagram. It's just not my thing. I just post pictures of my family there.
Yeah,
But
I'm
I don't
not
mind. I
professionally on Instagram either. I have a side hustle going on Instagram, so I won't share that.
You do.
Ankita's
Yes,
selling
No,
Indian
you got
jewelry.
you got to send that to us. I
I'll
want to know what the
happily do it
side hustle is.
offline.
I
Okay,
have
so
I will satisfy everyone's medical needs on Instagram. I have a professional and a private page. The private one's private, but the professional one's there in the chat window. If you would like to follow, I would love to keep in touch with all of you lovely people.
And yeah, and I have to say this about Instagram to what Niket said that um, the it can be very, very visual, and it also gives you other side hustle opportunities. So, and I am okay with that. I was engaged in a very raging debate about this recently about whether the side hustles are cool. I don't care. I think if you got a side hustle, good for you. Good for you, buddy. Go for it. So yeah, I forgot the side hustle angle is very important on Instagram.
great. So we'll finish with this question, then we'll let everybody go. So in between a full-time job of medicine, research, and family friends, how do you fit social media time into your day? Also, how do you deal with negative press on your media platforms?
Bring your phone into the
I feel
bathroom.
like
That's your best time.
Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't use social media any differently than I would use email. So I don't pick up my phone during dinner with my wife, or I think those rules of engagement have to stay. They just can't change. You still have to function in society. I know some people who seemingly are tweeting all the time. Um, I'm not sure how they keep it up. I wouldn't advise it, especially if you're just using it to augment some element of your professional life, like education or whatever. Yeah, so use it like email whenever you get time. You're on the train, you're in the cab. Yeah, don't let it run your life. I agree if
Right.
that is the concern.
Yeah, I am a proponent of taking social media vacations, in which basically, every few days I will be like off the grid. Nobody can find me on social media, just purely to kind of sit through your thoughts, which is something I think is very, very important, especially in line with the idea of burnout. Certainly, you do not have to read every article and every post on your Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram feed. You are not going to miss out. So this whole idea of FOMO, like you got to leave it at the door.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and you gotta. It's okay to disconnect. I mean, if the Twitter's not gonna go anywhere, Instagrams and those, scrub Instagrams are not going to go anywhere. People are going to still be posting their photos. Don't worry about it. You don't feel like it, let it go. Have to.
Great. So I think that'll wrap it up for our questions. We do have a few more, and what I'll do for people, that if your questions did not get answered, we will let the panelists look at the questions and answer them, and then we will get them emailed back to you in a timely fashion. So at this point, I just want to thank Dr. Kaul and Dr. Sampal and Dr. Sagar for their help in this wonderful webinar. And everybody have a great day. And a recording will be available for it if you missed it.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Thank you for listening. Bye now.